Hi, this is Matt from We Will Rock You project, and this is just a quick video giving you an overview of some different methods of notation and how you can go about composing music in different ways using different software. So as you'll see when we get into it, this isn't just about how you present it and how you write it down, but all these different methods I'll show you actually change what kind of music you write and the way in which you can come up with different ideas. So some things lend themselves to different genres or to different purposes, like if you're hiring session musicians, for example, you need to give them certain things. But most of all, it's just about finding something which is quick and easy for you so that you can get ideas from your head onto a page or a software or whatever as quickly and seamlessly as possible, so that you can just concentrate on creativity without having to be distracted by any software or theory or anything like that that you're not comfortable with. So before we get into the details about all the different kinds of software and methods available, I just want to give you one quick tip, which is the best piece of composition advice I ever received, ever. And that is basically, on your phone, find your voice memo app or voice recorder and put it on your home screen. Sounds weird, but every musician I know, from beginners right through to professionals, you don't have your best creative ideas when you sit down and decide to write something. It's usually just when you're out and about, in the shower, whatever, doing your shopping, whatever it is, you just come up with a little melody or something. And if you've got an easy way to just tap record on your phone and just get that idea down in 5 seconds, then when you do sit down to write music, you're left with a whole library full of little ideas and starting points, so you can just get going straight away instead of just staring at a screen wondering where to start. So the first method I'm going to look at is the obvious one, just the standard music notation. You've all seen it before. It's just 5 horizontal lines with little dots and sticks, you know the kind of thing. So some of you might be comfortable reading this already, but if you're not, it's a lot less complicated than it looks. So don't worry too much about it. Now this is obviously the traditional way of writing classical music, but also no matter what genre you're writing in, if you're writing for musicians to play your music and they play classical instruments like string instruments or like flutes or brass or anything like that, this is the kind of music they're going to want to read. So even if you're working in a genre which isn't normally concerned with this kind of notation, it's really worth having a grip of it so that you can work with other musicians. If if you're working on a rap track and you want to get a string quartet or something, you can just write some music out for them and job done. So let's get into it. This method of notation has a lot of detail in it. So it maps out every little detail, every note, every rhythm, dynamics, all kinds of things, all written there on the page. So whoever's reading it is going to play it pretty much the same every time, which is different to other things like lead sheets and chord sheets, which we'll get into later. There's a really good piece of free software that you can download online called MUSESCORE 3. And it's completely free, completely legal and everything, and it has everything you need to get started with notation, and it's really useful because you can actually listen back to what you've done, so you can sort of experiment with it. Even if you don't have a complete grip on all the theory, you can write something in and then listen back to check it is actually what you meant and it sounds how you meant it to sound. So notation is always written on what we call a stave, which is just 5 horizontal lines, and you read it from left to right just like when you're reading normal words. Now you've seen all the little dots and sticks. Each dot is one note, one sound. The higher up on the stave it's written, the higher the pitch, the lower the pitch. So the exact pitch that each line and space represents depends on something called the clef. Now this just changes the reference point so that we can use the same 5 lines for high-pitched instruments and low-pitched instruments and everything in between. So essentially the most common clefs are called bass for low instruments and treble clef for high instruments. So a note that's written on the top line of treble clef will sound very, very high, but a note written in the same place, still on the top of the 5 lines, but in bass clef, will sound a lot lower than treble clef. To start with, if you can find one note in each clef, then you can figure out all the others based on that. So an A in treble clef is in the space just below the middle line. So it's not on, it doesn't cross the line itself, it's just below the middle line. In bass clef, it's the next space down. And that's also a lower octave of A, but it's still an A. Now once you've found your A, you can figure out all the others. Remember, it goes A to G and then back to A. So the note directly below A is a G. Now, like I just mentioned, notes can be either on the lines, sort of directly, the line crosses through the dot, or they can be in the spaces in between the lines. And basically each time you go up one, you go up a note on the keyboard. So that will give you all the notes in a C major scale, which you may have heard of, and is just all of the white notes on a keyboard. Now, if you need any of the other notes, if you're working in a different key or you just want to get a bit more experimental with it, we need something called accidentals. And those are just little signs that go just to the left of the dot, and they move it up or down by just a semitone, which is just going to the very next key on the keyboard. Now, this is called sharp for going higher, or flat for going lower. So if you take an A on the keyboard, an A flat would be the black note just to the left, and an A sharp would be a black note just to the right. And these have their own little symbols in notation. Now, if we're using a different key, which has, say, every B in the piece is actually going to be a B flat, we don't really want to have to write out the little symbol every single time we write a B. So we have what's called a key signature. That means you basically just have the accidentals written at the very beginning of each line, and then whoever's reading the music just assumes that they apply to every time that note appears whenever they're playing. So every time they come to a B, they'll just assume it's a B flat without having to write it every single separate time. Now, each key has its own set of sharps and flats, but that's more detail we can go into another time. So that's pitch, basically how high up the little dot is on the stave. If you have a chord with several notes together, they'll just be written above each other, sort of in the same space. So the rhythm is shown by basically the stick coming off the note and whatever's joined to that. And the basic rule of thumb is more lines is faster notes. So your basic one beat note is what's known as a crotchet or a quarter note, depending which system you want to use. They're both fine. Now, you know, when we've done performance classes, we've been counting to 4 beats in a bar. It's just one of those, and that's why it's called a quarter note. So a bar is marked on the music with little vertical lines on the stave, and every single bar is the same length of time, exactly the same length of time, and they should all add up to 4 beats. Now, no matter what rhythms you've written, you might not be playing anything at all in that bar, but it still lasts for exactly the same amount of time. So our crotchet, or our quarter note, that's just your basic, it's a dot with a stick coming off it. Nothing joined to the stick, nothing else going on. The dot's filled in, it's not hollowed out, we'll get to that later. So, if you want faster notes, they're not just randomly faster, we double them every time. So a quarter note is a dot on a stick. An eighth note, or a quaver, if you're using that system, it'll be the same dot, same stick, and then it'll either have one little line flicking off it, or if there are a few in a row, there'll be one line joining them together. So if there's any notes that are joined up by one line or have one line flicking off them, that's an eighth note or a quaver. They are twice as fast as crotchets. So eighth notes twice as fast as quarter notes, or half as long, depending how you want to think about it. Now, we can double it again, and we get 16th notes, or semi-quavers. These are joined up by 2 lines, so the more lines, the faster the note. So 16th notes, semi-quavers, same thing, joined up by 2 lines, or have 2 little flicks coming off the stem of the note. So we know a bar is made up of 4 beats, so you can fit 4 crotchets into it. You can fit 2 eighth notes into each crotchet, 2 16th notes into each eighth note. So you can make combinations of any of these as long as they always add up to 1 bar. And that's about it for the faster rhythms. If you want longer notes than quarter notes, say if you want only 2 notes in a bar, they're called half notes or minims. The old-fashioned way of saying it. And they look the same as crotchets, just a dot on a stick, except the dot isn't filled in. It's just like a little O, but it still has a stick. If you want to go half the speed again to a whole note, which takes up the entire bar on its own, it's 4 beats long. A whole note is just the little O with no stick on it at all. So those are all your different basic rhythms. You can combine them in any way, as I said. It just needs to always add up to 1 bar. Now if you want any gaps in the music where there aren't any notes being played at all, that's fine, you just write what we call rests. Now the important thing with this is they're still a measured amount of time. So they last exactly the same length as all the different notes, and we have all the same values for rests as we do for notes, but it just means don't play anything. But it's not just stop for a random amount of time. You're still in time with the music and you're still counting it when you're reading it. So our quarter note rest, which is the equivalent of our dot with the stick, is basically just looks like a little squiggle. You'll recognise it when you see it. An eighth note rest, so half the length of a quarter note rest, twice the speed, half the length. An eighth note rest is like a diagonal line with 1 little flick off the top. 16th note rest, same pattern as before, instead of 1 flick it's 2 flicks. And so on. If you wanted even faster notes or rests, you could put 3 flicks, 4 flicks, every time it doubles. A half note rest is like a little rectangle sitting on top of the middle line. And the only one left then is a whole note rest, so do nothing for a whole bar, and that is the same rectangle as the half note, except instead of sitting on the middle line, it's kind of hanging off the line above it. So the second line from the top, it's sort of attached to the bottom of it there. So the only other thing to mention about notation for now is dynamics. Now, as we all know, dynamics basically just mean how loud you play or how quietly you play. And these are written as little letters and symbols below the music. Now they come from the old Italian words from classical music. So F for forte means loud, P for piano means quiet, and then you kind of have MF for like medium loud, MP for medium quiet, and then you can just, if you want it really, really, really loud, you can just put F, 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 F. And so on, the same for P. There's a couple of other little things like a crescendo, which means gradually get louder. So it doesn't just suddenly change dynamic, it's a gradual change. And you can write this either just by writing the word crescendo, or you can draw like a little, it's like 2 sides of a triangle, like that, going from left to right, starting small together at a point and getting bigger, just to signify getting louder. The opposite of that, a diminuendo, gradually getting quieter, the same symbol but back to front. Or you can just write dim. If you're a guitarist or a bass player or ukulele or anything like that, anything with strings and frets, you might have heard of tab. Now tab is basically an offshoot of standard notation, but instead of the lines being pitch, the lines are, there's 1 line for each string. So on a guitar you've got 6 strings, you've got 6 lines on your tab. A bass you've got 4 strings usually, so you've got 4 lines on the tab. Now the rhythm works in the same way, notes will still be kind of joined up and all that sort of thing for the rhythm. But pitch, instead of having little dots, we just have little numbers. Now the numbers will be put on whichever string is relevant, and the number means which fret you're playing. So it's simple as that. And this can be really, really useful if you're a guitarist or a bass player and you like to write on your instrument. You know, you're just playing around, improvising, experimenting with things, and you find a chord or a little melody you like, you can literally just look at your hand and write down what you see. So it's really quick and easy for that. If you don't play at all yourself, tab is often a tricky route because it's quite easy to write things which are kind of physically very difficult to play on the instrument unless you have a sort of basic grip of what you can reach with your hand and everything like that. But a lot of guitarists prefer reading tab to notation. It's easier to read chords, it kind of suits the pitch of the instrument better.